All right, so we're in week 8. We are finally at the end of the class. I'm sure everybody is really excited. So week 8, we're talking about systems of equations. So um, I'm testing out a polling system. I don't know why it's giant. It should not be giant. I just tested this an hour before and it was not this big. So I don't know why this is so large. Um, but the question is, how do you feel about algebra now that the course is ending? And then you should be, I don't even, yeah, this is so big. Okay, so I'm going to start the poll. This is so weird because I just did this and it wasn't this big. Um, so this is a word cloud, so you put in words and then it should populate with your words. If you text this number and then you type in your word, it should populate. So, but we've only got one person, so not good doing, not much of a poll if you have only one person, and you can't really see it. So I'm gonna have to mess around with this. I'm giving a talk on Friday, and so I wanted to put a poll in my talk at the very beginning to ask people if they teach online, if they teach more traditional, if they do hybrid. And so I'm just kind of experimenting with this, and this clearly is not working. It's so giant. Yeah, so not sure. All right. Yeah, yeah, it's giant. Well, we'll just skip through that if it will let me. Let me click out of there. Okay. So this week we are doing a little bit of chapter 6. We're only doing the first 2 sections of chapter 6, which is linear nonlinear systems of equations, and 6.2, which is 2 variable systems of equations. We're only doing a little bit because this is going to be covered again in pre-calculus, which is MA141. So when you get to pre-calculus, week 1 will be review of all of column algebra. Then week 2 will be systems of equations and inequalities. So it will pick up basically right where we left off right here. So the things that you're going to be using this week, you're going to be doing a lot of solving of linear and quadratic equations and graphing. Those are like the biggest skills that you're going to be doing. You will not really be factoring for once. So the big thing this week, so you've got your discussion, your ungraded practice assignment. There is no regular assignment because you're going to have an assignment on this when you get to pre-calculus, plus we want you to focus on the final exam. So you only have 3 things: your discussion, the ungraded practice assignment, and then the final exam. So let's start with the discussion. So there are actually 2 different discussions. If you may have noticed, there's a discussion, a week 8 discussion 1, week 8 discussion 2. So discussion 1 is the graded discussion. So let me just make sure that the one that's graded. So you need to do that. It's required. It's a reflection on the course. So the questions you're going to be answering are: what skills do you think this course has helped you develop? Do you see those skills being beneficial in other courses and or your daily life? And when we say skills, it doesn't have to be things like factoring. Maybe you developed time management skills. Maybe you developed note-taking skills. So they don't have to necessarily be math skills, just skills in general. How do you think algebra, either the skills or the concepts, can be applied in your career? What topic did you find the most interesting and why? What advice would you give to a student starting the class next term? And what classes are you taking next term? So the last question is hopefully so you can find other people in the same classes and maybe you can start like forming study groups. The second discussion is ungraded. So, well, that was a funny G. Ungraded. And it is about the end of course survey. So before you do that discussion, make sure you complete the end of course survey. And then after you complete the survey, share what you feel is the most valuable suggestion for improvement. Share only what you are comfortable with. Ensure that this suggestion is also in the survey comment section when you do the end of course survey. So this is, everything in the discussion is public. Your classmates can see what you wrote. I can see what you wrote. So Just keep that in mind when you're writing your suggestion for improvement. I don't want to see. Well, I mean, you could have a suggestion of just get rid of the class, but it's not going to happen. But just be aware that this is public, so um, don't go swearing or anything about try to be positive because I'm going to be looking at what you have and saying what can I do better next time. So I'd much prefer to see suggestions that are positive, that are constructive, rather than just seeing complaints. So just as an FYI. So that's the discussion. Next, your assignments. So as I said, you only have the ungraded practice assignment this week, and this is on the stuff you're learning this week, the Chapter 6 stuff. So even though you don't have an assignment that's graded on Chapter 6, I do recommend doing the ungraded practice assignment. There's only a few problems here because there will be a question on the final exam covering this week. There's only one question covering this, but there is still a question. So I should write that down. There will be a question on the final covering these topics. Only one question. So the only way you'll get practice is by doing those practice problems. So your final exam, this is a big deal. So this is going to be very similar to the midterm. It's 20 multiple choice questions. You have 2 hours to complete it. You need to complete it in one sitting. And then you submit your work to the Dropbox, which is required. Now, because this is the end of course, if something goes wrong with your final exam, say you accidentally submit it, or there's a technology thing, I cannot do anything about that if the course has already closed. So you're going to want to make sure that you take the final exam with enough time so that in case something happens, you can reach out to me. Now, I don't have office hours Tuesday night, so I stop checking my email by 5 on Tuesday night. That's the end of the office day on Tuesday night. So if you're emailing me after 5 p.m. on Tuesday, very last day of the class, it's unlikely I'm going to get it until after the course has already closed. So your best bet would be try to either send me a Hangouts message, because that I do monitor, or to make sure you've done the final before then, so that if in case something happens, you have time to reach out to me. So just keep that in mind. The final exam is 15% of your grade. So you really do want to do this. At the end of every I see students that have not done the final exam, and that's huge. That really hurts your score, because that's a letter or grade and a half if you don't do the final exam. So do the final exam. It's 15%. It is 20 multiple choice questions. You have 2 hours. Make sure you have enough time. You start it soon enough. Make sure you submit your work, because that's how you get partial credit. So remember, if you don't turn in your work for the drop boxes, your score may be cut in half. So that's for any of the drop boxes so far. So if by the end of the term, at the end of the course, if you have not turned in any drop box, your quiz score may go down and your grade may go down because you haven't submitted those. So make sure you submit your work for all of the quizzes, the midterm, and the final exam, so that does not happen. Plus, that allows you to get partial credit. So it's really important to do that. I've seen some people that have gotten up to 20 points partial credit. So make sure you turn in your work. Very, very important. So the topics covered cover week 4 through week 8. So it's only one question from week 8. Everything else is from weeks 4 through 7. So you're going to be asked about functions. You're going to have function notation, the combinations, and the inverses. This was week 4. All 3 of those things I have live sessions on. So I did have videos for each of those. Then we've got analyzing graphs and equations. So you're going to be asked about domain, finding the zeros, finding the asymptotes, finding the intercepts, and finding transformations. So I recommend that you use Desmos for these. And I have videos that talk about zeros and asymptotes. Most of the asymptotes are related to the rational functions. On the rational function video, I'm talking about domain and the intercepts as well. Zeros are covered in the rational and the polynomial functions. So you can review those videos. Also use Desmos. And obviously for the graphing questions, use Desmos. Then you do have to write equations for polynomials, variation, and exponential models. So I have a video, I have a live session on the exponential. That was the one that I did this past Monday. And then I do have a live session on the polynomials. That was the zeros live session, the one that was about zeros of polynomials. I did go through writing equations of polynomials. So I have videos on that, then properties of logarithms, and then solving. So you'll have to solve exponential equations and logarithmic equations. So I have live sessions. Actually, all of these I'll have live sessions from because I'm going to be doing one on systems of equations tomorrow, I believe. So they're all in the live sessions as well. And then, of course, synthetic division, I also had a live session for. So you may have noticed most of the things I've been doing live sessions for have been things leading up to what you need to know for the final exam. So I've been very careful to make sure that you are prepared by covering the material that you will need to know and what's important going forward. Let's see, so what's the synthetic division? That is, I believe that's 3.3, that section. If you're looking for that, properties of logarithms is, I think, 5.3 for that. So this is everything that's going to be covered on the final exam. Okay, so top 5 most difficult topics. This is based off of what previous students have done. So the worst scoring question is writing exponential models. So I did a live session on that. Second worst scoring was function combinations. Again, live session. Then we've got variation, which I did not do a live session for. That's something that I should do next term. So variation. Solving systems of equations, which is the stuff you're learning this week. I'm not surprised that's a weak topic because you haven't had a lot of time to practice it, but I am doing a live session on that one. And then synthetic division, which I did a live session on. So those were the lowest scoring questions out of the past several terms. I've been collecting all of the data. So to study for the quiz, what I recommend you do is you review your assignments from weeks 4 through 7, because those are going to be similar to the types of questions you have on the final exam. So make sure you know how to do each problem, and I recommend you find practice problems out of the textbook that are similar to those. You can use the search function in the ebook to search for the directions to try to find something similar. Review your quizzes from weeks 5 through 7 because those are also quizzed on those same topics. Take a look at those practice problems. Do problems from the cumulative test. So there are, at the end of some chapters, there's what's labeled as a cumulative test, which goes through several sections. So doing problems from those would be very helpful as well. And then doing practice problems from IXL or Khan Academy. If you use IXL, you can just type in the search box the topic you're looking for, and then that will give you a list of practice problems to do. I'm actually going to show if I still have the spreadsheet open. No, I closed my spreadsheet. Let me open my spreadsheet again just to show you. Let me go to the final exam just so you can see. So you're not actually seeing any of the questions here. So this is not anything, oops. This is just my spreadsheet where I keep track of each term and the averages. So 20 questions, you can see the orders that they're in. These are the overall average score for the final exam is a 73%, which is a C. So that's the overall average for the final exam. Um, most of them have been in that ballpark all around C's. There was one class that got a lower score, but for the most part, they're all there. And so you can see the averages for each question. So like the exponential equation one, about half of the students get that one right. So, but if you do, you turn in your work, that's going to aid you because then at least you can get partial credit and get a better score. So you can expect on average to get a C, and then the more you study, the better you should do on the final exam. But I wouldn't be C, and some of these were almost at B's for the average, so that's pretty good for a final exam. I always put these in perspective for my own. When I took chemistry in college, I got a 50% on the final exam. So I look at these numbers and I'm like, wow, these are really good because I got a 50% on my final exam. So that gives you an idea of where we're at with the final. So are there questions on the expectations for the final, when it's going to be covered, anything like that? Okay, doesn't look like it. So the suggested schedule to kind of work through all of this. So there's only 2 sections this week, and so I recommend that you use the remaining of the time to make sure you finish everything up. The discussion is easy enough to do today, so you can get that knocked out. You can do the readings Thursday and Friday and work on the practice problems. I've split them up. Your extra time, I recommend that you study for the final and then work, if you want to increase your score, work on redoing the assignments that have low scores or making sure you get your drop boxes in for the quizzes and the final exams. Or yeah, in the midterm. So I've split up the final. It's best if you study a little bit every day, so that you're not overwhelming yourself. There was a study that found when you're taking a test, students do better if they sit up straight. It's really interesting. I think it's because if you sit up straight, your posture is more confident, and so I think that makes people more confident on the test, and then they perform better. There was a study about the Superman pose that is supposed to like help people perform better. So when you take the final, try to sit up straight, and that should help um, your performance. There was a study done that found that bananas aid memory, so maybe eat some bananas while you're studying or taking the final. I don't know, you can give it a try. But definitely don't cram. Cramming is not successful. It's better to study a little bit at a time. So that's why I've spread these things out, like basically a week, study a week. I've picked out some questions from the cumulative tests, and I told you where they are. So there's a cumulative test at the end of chapter 2. There's one at the end of chapter 5. So you can study from both of those. And then just make sure that you have enough time to, actually take the final exam. Make sure you get everything in. So that leads us to the end of course information, because this is the last week of class, and so there's some very important things that we need to know about due dates and all that sort of stuff. So our course ends October 8th at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. If you're in Eastern Time, you're an hour ahead, so that would be 12:59 a.m. Eastern Time. Once the course closes, you lose access. So if you are in the middle of the final exam and the course closes, you may not be able to finish the final exam. So you want to make sure you start the final exam before, at least 2 hours before, so that you don't come across that deadline. There is no work accepted after the course closes. Once the course closes, you lose all access, so you can't submit any assignments via Blackboard. I cannot accept any assignments that are emailed. I must accept work in Blackboard. This is a university rule. It's part of our compliance issues and accreditation rules. They need to have everything in the LMS. So you cannot email me your work. So you need to make sure everything is submitted via Blackboard. So make sure you have enough time in case there are technology issues. The final grades, those are submitted by Friday. I will not be emailing out your grade. I need to spend that time grading. So you can check your grade by Saturday. It should be available. If you have an incomplete, that begins October 14th, and then you get 2 weeks. Now, in order to qualify for an incomplete, you need to have completed at least 50% of the work and have extenuating circumstances. So requests for an incomplete must include proper documentation, basically why you need the incomplete, what are your extenuating circumstances, and a list of the missing work with a schedule for completing each task. So to make sure that you have planned out that you can finish this in 2 weeks. So keep that in mind if you think you're eligible for an incomplete and want for one. There are stipulations, and those are listed in the student handbook as well. And lastly, your next term starts October 9th, which is basically the very next day after this course ends. So preview week for that starts tomorrow. So there's no break week this time. Because of that, it's going to be a little tight. It's tight for you guys, it's tight for me because I have to start setting up classes while I'm also finishing up the class, just like you're trying to get your next books while you're finishing up this one. So it's tight for everybody. So what I recommend is make sure at least when you get your classes, well, you should have your classes because today is the start of preview week. I don't know why I was thinking it was Tuesday. Today's Wednesday. Have your classes already. So first thing you should do is make sure you have access to your ebook. So that's what I recommend you do. Make sure you have access to the ebook. Check out the instructor information. If it's not in there, the instructor may not have been assigned yet. They're still finalizing assignments because the enrollment numbers are still kind of moving. I don't know what I'm teaching yet. They should be finalized in the next couple of days. But at least you guys have your classes. You know what classes you're taking. So check out the syllabus. Make sure you understand what all your tasks are. Make sure you have access to the ebook. And also, don't forget, make sure you have everything in for this course. The stuff you can get in for this course, the better. If you're wondering what's the most important things, the most important thing to get in is the midterm and the final exam, and then the quizzes. After that, so if you have any missing quizzes or missing midterm or whatever, or you haven't done the final exam, make that your priority. Once you finish that, then go back and do any assignments or discussions, because those are not as worth as much. So that should be your priority. So that is it. Are there any questions? Any questions on the expectations, what you have to do, anything at all?